I'd now like to retell a story that I wrote up in Truth Proof 1, The Truth That Leaves No Proof.
Hello again, back in Danes Dyke and in this little bit of woodland once again at the top of Danes Dyke that overlooks the sea. And I'd just like to tell you about something that happened way back in 1966, so we're going back over 50 years. And it's a tragedy because 3 young men from Halifax decided that they were going to come for a week's holiday to Bridlington and the surrounding area, and they chose this wood as their place to camp. And they set up camp on the edge of the cliffs.
And in the book it's entitled Riddle of the Empty Campsite. You know, and I've said many times how I've spoken about the missing people who seemingly vanished without trace from the area, and stressed on every occasion that I cannot connect any of these missing people to UFOs, cryptids, or anything of that nature. However, they've gone missing in an area where things of a highly unusual nature take place, and by virtue of that fact alone, they have to be included in a book of the strange and unusual.
Their ages were between 19 and 23 years old.
So, Riddle of the Empty Camp. One mystery that first came out of the area was first reported in the Bridlington Free Press and Chronicle on April the 29th, 1966. The newspaper tells of a tragedy that unfolded during the Easter weekend, when 3 young men simply disappeared without trace. The 3 men were from Halifax and were on a camping trip to Danes Dyke, close to Flamborough. The alarm was raised when they never returned home for work on Wednesday, April the 13th. The young men's concerned parents travelled to Flamborough, where the police were notified.
So one of the fathers drives through from Halifax and contacts the police and says, you know, his son and 2 other men come on holiday and they haven't arrived. They proceed with a police officer. He proceeds to do a search and he ends up in this woodland. The same woodland, incidentally, where I've done a few more of these shorts. This is the same bit of woodland where the young lady with her husband and children decided that she wanted a wee and went behind a tree and ended up screaming hysterically because she claimed that something was holding her down on her shoulders. So it's a strange place to start with, but let's assume the camp is set up around here. 1966. Father and police officer come and search Danes Dyke and they find the tent still fastened up, not being interfered with, not being tampered with. When they open the cords on the tent, because I don't think there'd have been zips in them days, they find all the young men's provisions, food, personal items, all in haversacks, all neatly stashed in the tent. No men. They'd disappeared.
A short time later, their tent was found in the woods, just 20 metres back from the cliff edge. Unusually, the tent contained all their bedding, a hurricane lamp, other equipment and 3 heavily laden haversacks which had not been used for several days. Helicopters searched the cliffs and coastline and police with dogs searched the surrounding area. On Monday, April the 18th, 5 days after the boys should have been home, the body of one of the missing 3 men
was found on the beach at Primrose Valley. That's about 8 miles away, or 6 to 8 miles away, because, you know, depending whether you come to Filey or Primrose Valley. No signs of injury, no signs of trauma. They just found his body on the beach.
19-year-old Rupert Barrett was found by a man walking the beach at Primrose Valley, 8 miles away from Danes Dyke. There was no clue how Rupert's body ended up on the beach so far away from the dyke. It was presumed at the time that it was just a tragic accident, The report says that the young men may have been returning back along the beach to their camp and were cut off by the tide. It went on to say that when the body was found, Barrett's body had no obvious signs of injury. The doctor who examined the body was of the opinion that the death was due to drowning, adding that he had clearly been in the water for some hours. Yet by then he had been missing 5 days. Some hours and 5 days. It doesn't quite correlate to me. So for the doctor to say some hours seems somewhat inaccurate. It has to be presumed that the three went missing sometime before April the 13th. But however much time had passed, missing for days is not the same as missing for some hours.
Days after that, divers in Selwick's Bay or Silex Bay, I'm not sure which, I think it was Silex, found themselves in a deep water gully and found deep below the surface the bodies of 2 young men. The other 2 brought them to the surface. No signs of obvious trauma. Unfortunately, obviously they've died from drowning, I would have thought, but the newspaper article doesn't say that. The newspaper article says Riddle of the empty camp and a big question mark placed at the side of it. So the conclusions were, because nobody knows why they ended up there, that they've decided to go for a walk maybe to Filey and got cut off by the tide and drowned. I think you would have found out long before you got to Filey that it was an impossible task to walk round the bottom of these cliffs. There's water there at all times of year, depending on where you go. And it is quite treacherous. And would you leave all your belongings, including the items that you might need when you go to Filey, in the tent? It's a strange one.
10 days later, on Thursday, April the 28th, the bodies of Rupert Barrett's friends, Eric Reynolds and Stuart Greaves, were found in the water near Selwick's Bay, just off Flamborough Head. Their bodies had been located in a deep water gully by 2 members of the British Sub-Aqua Club. At the inquest into the young men's death, the coroner said there was no doubt that all 3 had drowned, and that the bodies had no evidence of injuries that could be caused by a fall, and there was no suggestion that they had been trying to climb the cliffs. As with so many historical accounts, it is impossible now to say how these young men came to a tragic end. The question remains that if they were going out for the day on foot to another area, why would they have left their haversacks behind, with all their personal belongings, including the items they would have needed for the day? In an unsecured tent? Would they really do that? On the same page of the Bridlington Free Press and Chronicle, which reported the 3 young men missing, was a small account of another tragedy: the body of 82-year-old Mr. Robert Teal from Nottingham. He had been found at the water's edge. The report vaguely states that he was found on a Bridlington beach, but there was no actual date given. I can only glean references from the dates in the report that it must have been on April the 14th. The newspaper states that his death was recorded as misadventure, adding that Mr. Teal had died from asphyxia due to drowning. The coroner was satisfied he had not entered the water deliberately. 4 deaths within such a short space of time must have been considered unusual. Or would it? Since the sea is such an expert killer that when a body is found, usually no other suspects are required. Fascinating. So there you have it. 4 deaths in a short space of time with no apparent motives. I thought about the suggestion that they've been cut off by the tide, and I suppose we have to look at the logical, and that is a strong possibility. But for me, the true mystery is why 3 young men would leave all of their items in an unsecured tent on the cliff tops at Danes Dyke and spend the day in another town without anything that they would need for that day. Highly unusual, and although we'll never know the reasons why these unfortunate men came to such a sad end, it truly is a mystery in an area where lots and lots of mysteries take place.
It's a strange one. I also got reports whilst writing the first book from fishermen who claimed that whilst fishing out in the bay, they'd seen anomalous spheres of light, white spheres of light along the cliff tops and along the cliff face. Now, obviously, I suppose these could have been the hurricane lamps of the young men. It's impossible to say, but it's fascinating nonetheless. So we've got a tragedy tinged with a mystery, and there we have it. And just before we close this down, I also did a short a few months ago where I touched upon the guys who came to have a bit of an all-night camp in this very same wood. I think back in 2015, 2016. And whilst they were camping, they saw a dark figure, probably stood, from what I can gather from these men, around here. And they thought it was somebody walking who didn't want to pass them, a bit intimidated by a group of men having, I think there was 3 of them, lighting a fire and having a bit of a wild camp. So one of the group went over to this perceived figure and realised that it was something else. It was definitely taller than him, much taller. He estimated whatever it was to be over 7 foot tall. And it frightened him, and he turned back, and the last they saw, they claimed that it jumped over the cliffs and disappeared into the night. And if you're watching this and you've got a story of your own that you'd like to share from this area, feel free to contact me. Other than that, thank you very much, and we shall see you next time. Don't forget, press the like and subscribe if you're enjoying what we're doing, and we'll just about leave it at that. Well, we will, but I just want to show you that. How good is that? And I think me and the Bobster are going to go down on the beach. Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.